Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Thanks for joining the conversation. Soo Lee is a comic artist and illustrator based in New York City. Her captivating storytelling and mesmerizing visuals have earned her recognition from DC Comics and Dark Horse Comics. Her work spans various genres, from captivating sequential art to striking cover designs. Soo's artistry is a testament to her boundless imagination and unwavering dedication to her craft. I enjoyed learning about her start in comics and upbringing in New York. She also shares her experiences and perspectives that shapes her life and artistic evolution. Soo is also a contributor to the Make Us Visible Florida Asian American and Pacific Islander Coloring Workbook, coming soon. I've been enjoying these conversations and hope you have too. If you have, please rate my podcast on your platform of choice and share it with others. If you would like to support with a donation to help keep this podcast going and support the work I do, you can become a patron of the show by visiting my website or patreon.com/SifuMimiChan. For comments or suggestions, reach out on social media at SifuMimiChan. Now, on with the show. Hello, Soo. Thank you so much for joining me on my podcast today.
Hi, nice to meet you. And thanks for having me on. I'm very excited.
Yes, yeah, it's amazing to meet you because we basically have only corresponded via email. And I want to thank you first and foremost because you were so kind to participate in the Make Us Visible Florida AAPI History Coloring Workbook. And it is just so meaningful to our community. But, not that the kids have seen it just yet, but on behalf of all of the kids that are going to be coloring in this and just taking the chance to learn a little bit more about AAPI history, just thank you so very much.
No, I mean, it's my honor to be a part of it. And really, thank you so much for asking me to, work on a piece for it. I think it's such a cool project. And, I kind of wish I had one when I was a kid.
Yeah. And, speaking of which, this is kind of just so, since this is the first time we are meeting, one of the reasons I started Make Us Visible Florida and decided to pursue this Asian American history legislation is because growing up in Florida, I didn't learn any Asian American history growing up. And just, kind of as an effect of the pandemic, my community reaching out to me, their concerns, their fears, I realized that this is something that was essential for all of us, not just for the kids, but for all the generations that also didn't get to learn that this would be something really important moving forward. And we're really excited about this coloring workbook because we've been able to collaborate with incredible artists such as yourself, but also, thinking back to your childhood, you just mentioned, I wish I had something like this. What was that like? Like, what was your childhood education like? And where did you grow up, if you don't mind sharing?
Sure. Actually, I say I wish I had that because, Asian representation is hard to come by back in like the 90s and the 2000s, right? Or, the early 2000s, I mean. But I'm lucky enough. I grew up in New York. I grew up in Flushing, Queens. It's very like immigrant heavy and, it's a very high Asian population, but not even that. I think Queens is one of the most populated borough in all of New York. So it's like Asian people, Spanish people, Polish people, Jewish people. It was like, just like a literal like hodgepodge of like all these ethnicities living in one neighborhood. So I was lucky enough to, have the Asian experience and also being exposed to other cultures. Like all my joke was that like I haven't met as many white people as I have when I went to art school. Because all my friends were Asian or Black or Hispanic, and I was like, it was kind of a culture shock in like my, when I turned 20, so I was lucky enough to grow up somewhere where it was very normal being Asian. I don't know if that makes sense to a lot of people. But I think I was very comfortable in my own skin for a lot of it. I was around a lot of like Asian friends and, their families and whatnot. And I'm very close to my family as well. So it really wasn't awkward, although, there are cultural, just like being in America, right? Like there's a lot of things that make you feel different for sure. But I am very lucky growing up in the neighborhood I did because, I love being Asian. I love Asian food, like I love my neighborhood. I've been in my neighborhood for like years, So, yeah, I just grew up in one of the coolest places in New York, I think.
Excellent, excellent. But in school, do you recall like learning about Asian American history? I'm so curious because around the country, I've been having these conversations, and in some pockets, where even though there was representation, when it came to like the actual education part, I'm super curious as to who got to learn what, because it's just not equal across states, right? And so I'm in Florida, so we're really lacking here. But I did hear in New York, some people have mentioned they learned some things, and others have said otherwise. So yeah, I'm just really curious, like what the education side of things were like for you.
My memory isn't as great as it was. I'm not that young anymore, but I don't know if that's interesting because I don't know if I particularly had any Asian education in school. It was mostly just so being an Asian American, it's very common for us to go to like Bible church or like Bible camp or something like that. Like I'm pretty sure a lot of Asian kids grow up because you know what? It's just like an after school program, So that's where I got most of the Asian cultural aspect of it, just being around a lot of like the other Korean kids and the other Chinese kids and like after school, which is also like a church thing. But other than that, in normal school, I don't really think I remember having any of that.
Right.
So I guess that's an interesting thing to think about because I guess like because of growing up in Flushing and having the after school experience, I totally forgot about public school part of it. Like, so I think not as much.
Right.
I could be wrong. Again,
right. I mean, we try not to remember our history class and things like that. Like, oh, okay, moving on, which is actually unfair. Many people really enjoy history, like my husband. And so that's the one class he remembers. So yes.
But it was American history, right? Like American and European history, which is like the standard history, but not a lot of Asian history, I gotta say.
Right. Well, which is actually exactly the point, right? So our curriculum is the whole idea is to make sure that American history is inclusive of the Asian American experience, and for Asian Americans to see themselves, and their contributions to the building of this country in particular. So it's not just about culture, but it's also, wow, yes, we have Asian American friends. Like it was really great that you had your neighborhood and you had your, foundation and your roots and your family around you. So that definitely, like you said, growing up, you didn't kind of have that, oh, I don't want to be Asian because no one around me is Asian. I think that's fantastic. But even in school, like we hope that, kids and non-Asian kids can see that Asian Americans have been so essential to, the founding of this country and all the civic contributions, because it's certainly something that I am still very, very, very neophyte on. I don't know all of the facts and I don't have all the historical information, but I've been learning. And through this process, it's been a really amazing learning experience. So it's always interesting to me to hear about everybody's experiences, because it also depends on what decade you went to school, things like that. And it's kind of been fascinating. But our hope is that, we have these coloring books and these workbooks so that teachers can learn alongside the students, and Asian American children as well as non-Asian American children can start to see all of the different, amazing parts of Asian American history that there is. So again, thank you so much for, participating. I'd love for you to kind of, share a little bit about, the inspiration behind how you drew your piece, because you had mentioned, I know you were on deadlines and that you had this grand plan of making it, several more businesses and buildings. And when I saw it, I was very, very already impressed. I was like, wow, I feel like you were able to capture so much, in this frame of, this young girl walking down the street with her boba tea. And like, you could just kind of feel, I felt like we were in Mills 50, being in Orlando and knowing what that district is, it's kind of our little, Asian pride of Orlando in terms of where all the businesses kind of go. It's not a Chinatown per se or a Vietnam town, because it's really just a melting pot of Asian American and other ethnic businesses. And we're really excited to kind of have a place here in Orlando that has that. But it really captured a really wonderful feeling, especially a young feeling. So, and I loved it. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about like kind of your approach, and just so our listeners and those who are actually holding the book, hopefully in the next month or so, will be able to kind of, look along and see, what the artist is thinking when they drew.
Well, I wanted it to give a young feeling. Well, because, it's for kids, right? Yeah. I wanted them to relate to it. My sister loves boba tea, right? I mean, I do too, but I don't drink it as much as she does. So I was like, well, I know a lot of people do. So I figured that's like, it's very Asian, but also very young, Mm-hmm. And I wanted it to be like a young Asian girl as well, to, representation. But also like, I've never seen, is it Mills 50?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. So I've never heard of the place before. I've only been to Orlando a handful of times. So I was like, heavily Googling it as well and looking it up. And I thought it was really interesting. So I wanted to, it's very like tight, right? My image with like all the businesses, because I wanted it to give like a close-knit neighborhood feeling, because I feel like it might be the only food representation that Florida might have. I mean, I've been to Florida a proper bunch of times. It's lacking in a lot of cuisine, I think. So I felt like this was a very unique place. I wanted it to give a very closeness feeling. And like I love Asian food, so I'm glad that you chose this topic for myself. Because I do Asian food is like my favorite cuisine of all time. Like if anyone gave me a ranking, Asian food's number one.
All right. And down the rabbit hole of that though, what's like the top 3? Because that's a huge wide genre.
Well, I love noodles, right?
Noodles? So okay.
It's really hard to pinpoint, but I just love noodles. Like I love pad thai, but I also love like simple Korean noodles. I don't know if you've ever had bibimbap, which is like leftover veggies, kimchi, like hot
so it's
pepper
like the
paste.
Fried rice of noodles, but cold. Yeah, but is it the glass noodles or?
No, it's like rice noodle. It's rice
okay.
flour noodle. Mm-hmm.
Got it.
It's perfect for summer. It's like my favorite type. But like all kinds of noodle, like jjajangmyeon, like just noodles in general. And then I just love dim sum, it's really hard to pinpoint, but noodles would be number one. Any variety of noodles.
I am with you there. You cannot not love noodles, right? So awesome, right. Awesome. Yes. And I think that the image was just, like I said, that kind of young feeling, but I think you did such a great job, especially for never ever being here and seeing the street. Like, thank you so much. That just shows like the level of your artistry to be able to kind of pull something like that together. But, talking about art school, like you mentioned that was the culture shock for you. Can you kind of share a little about that experience? And was it a culture shock for you because, like you said, you'd never met so many quote unquote white people until you were there? But also, I have been really excited through this project to meet more female artists, because I have to say I have a lot of comic creator friends and creators, and I'll say it's a little bit uneven in that world from even just my small circle. And so I was curious what that felt like for you, just starting off from art school and through your professional experience.
Well, I went to art school practically all my life. Like I went to an art specialized high school in the city. Okay. So like I had a lot of exposure to a lot of different types of art, I guess. But I really like comics. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, hey, there's a school that's, does comic work. So I was like, okay, I figured I'll go in there. I actually didn't almost get in because my GPA was terrible. Like I am academically very bad. So the art is all I have, really. So I went to art school, and it was the first time I was exposed to that world, right? But I didn't just do comics. I went into illustration as minors as well. And I love doing that. So I was also exposed to like different majors, right? So it wasn't just like comic nerds like all day, every day. Although most of my friends were. So it's like very different, you know. It's like a very different vibe. In school, there were a lot of like girls and women who wanted to be a comic book artist for sure. Although it was like a lot more men, for sure, but there were definitely women who took my class or took classes same as I did. But then like leaving art school, it was definitely like, oh, okay, I think the stereotype still exists because it's a very male dominated career. And I still think to some point it is, because I think it still outnumbers a lot of women and also, you know, people of color as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and hopefully that's kind of changing as we, you know, start to get more artists like yourself and some of the pioneers that kind of like put the foot through the door. And it's been interesting to kind of see that landscape. And what would you say is your like kind of your first exposure to comics? Was this something you read as a child, or was it like through art school? Or I mean, you've always been drawn to comics, and which ones did you just kind of have to pick up?
Yeah, I mean, like as an Asian kid, you love manga, right? Like manga, like whatever. I read like, you know, comic book, like Japanese or Asian comic books and got into that. And then, you know, I loved Batman, right? So that was like one of the first projects I did for school, you know, just redrawing like a Batman thing. And that was really fun. This was like in high school. And then, you know, was exposed to more different comics as I, you know, in high school, actually, because there was a lot of like comic geeks there. And so we did all that. And, you know, I gained my appreciation in college when I took a comics principal class and was just like comics boot camp, you know, like I had Klaus Janson and he taught me, like he taught everyone, and he was like very stern in how he taught things. And I was really appreciative. He taught me like why I want to be a comic artist. I mean, like reflectively, you know, after taking his class. And it was like very eye-opening, and, you know, it's an actual like storytelling, you know, job. And I really find that interesting. That's the most fun part of it, you know, because it's similar like most mediums, but very different, you know, because like a movie is fast paced and it's like a moving screen, right? But comics is like storyboarding that has to be put together in a way that's cohesive, you know, and there's like a whole mathematical thing, I think, that goes behind comics that people don't really talk about.
Yeah.
So, and I appreciate that, you know, it's like what makes sense, you know, like not talking down to your readers, making sure it's, you know, effective. And, you know, as an artist, like showing the story, not telling as much, you know. So there was a lot of things that like I liked comics, and then I really appreciated comics after taking Klaus's class.
I see. Interesting. And for your professional career, like I've spoken to so many amazing artists and they all have kind of a different story. A lot of them have the typical, well, I went to the conventions and I stood in line and I said, review my portfolio. And then a lot of people through art school was able to be, you know, introduced and get their portfolio seen. And what was that process like for you? And, you know, that I guess what you felt might be that breakthrough moment, or the moment where you felt like, okay, now I'm going to be a working artist, because there's always a little bit of a fear, right? As it's like you do something you love, and that doesn't always mean that we get to make a living off of what we love to do. And so it's a tough balance, I would imagine.
I love going to Comic-Con. I love going to all conventions, and I would shamelessly bring my portfolio like the other artists and show them around and get like nice compliments and stuff. But it was nothing. It was just like little drawings, no sequential art, you know? And so in college, I had to really like hone in on that. And I was terrible for a really long time. Like, I still think, you know, I was terrible like a year ago, you know, but it's a learning thing, right? It's like dog ears. like every 5 years, it feels like you've, matured and are in your skill set 100 times, right? Or at least that's what you should be aiming for, right? So every year could like your art could get different because sometimes people still find styles or it gets better or maybe it's doesn't look as good or whatever. But I think it's a year by year basis. So I think it's really hard to say like how much time, but I was really bad. Like I think I like got better as I jumped into just working, just like learning by doing, right? That's the only way to do it. Although if I looked at my portfolio, but like books that I drew 5 years ago, I think I would like just die from cringe.
I think we often feel that way about our work, though, as we look back. And really,
no, but really, I'm like, do not ever show this to me ever again. No, but I don't know. I feel like I still haven't broken in yet. I don't know if that makes sense, right?
Yeah,
like I still feel like I'm trying to get there, and I guess that's a good thing. Maybe not as much for my anxiety, but like, it'll keep me in check. But I don't know. I don't know if I've ever fully broke in, like I still feel like there's so much I need to do and I haven't done yet. So I'm just still chasing that dragon, but I started like, well, I had to leave college because I was broke, so like I didn't even graduate. I just like, left. And I had to like work full time for a few years. So I didn't even get started until I was like in my early 20s. And it was like I was doing retail jobs, multiple jobs, and literally doing the bare minimum freelance jobs. I'm talking about free work or like horribly paid work just to get stuff, just to get my name out there and, make a little bit of money, while I was working part-time.
Yeah.
I mean, full-time. Right. And so it was like a big juggle and, I was serious, but not as serious as I am now because I was financially not in the place that I could, be serious about it. And even until 2019, like right when the pandemic hit, like that's when I left my full-time job. Like I worked at an office and my friends know this, but like I worked at an office for a comic book company doing like office things, and so I left not too long ago and I just started doing this full-time freelancing. Like how long ago? 19, like 4 years
4
now.
Years.
Yeah.
So coming on 5 years, really, because we're in December when we're talking. So
I know. I know. So it's not even that long in the grand scheme of this.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, it's a journey. It's definitely a journey. And it's a brave one to undertake, though, right? And that's why I said, wow.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, literally the starving artist thing. It's like, okay, we're gonna...
No. I did not want to do that. Well, because like I was very poor. Like I grew up very poor at a certain time of my life. It was extremely hard. So I was like, I can't do this again in my 20s or my 30s. Right. And, knock on wood, I'm not now anymore. But I was like working and I did comics full time while working right before, like until 2019, because like I just couldn't, and it was like, I saved up a lot of money and it was like very hard. Like I had to do the math and I was like, okay, if I quit now, maybe I can save up, and blah, 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 blah. So like I made sure most of my ducks were in a row. And then I made the leap of faith, right? I don't think anyone should do that unless you have a safety net or like you're safe enough. I think it's like very fantastical and sure, it's very like cool to be like, you know what, I'm just going to be a freelancer now and I got to chase my dreams even if it's hard. But it's like, no, when it's hard, it's really hard. It's like torturously hard. So I feel like if you do have to work, you must work while doing comics. Like, if you love doing comics, you got to make it work some way. And I think your well-being and health and financial stability is also important. So if you got to work part-time somewhere, I think you have to do it. Because I mean, I did it. It's
Mhm.
just it's too hard. The starving artist thing, especially in comics, is so incredibly hard. I want to protect people from that if I could.
Yeah. So I love that. So advice to our, listeners that want to be comic artists or have, thought about that dream. I think there's a nice balance, right? Between chasing your dreams, but also living in reality because,
Yes,
you have to eat and not just ramen noodles. We need like the good Korean noodles for
that's right.
nutrition.
That's right.
Talk to me about the projects you're working on. I think you've got Carmilla and some Disney villain stuff. I'd love to hear about what you're doing right now and or the things that you've just wrapped on.
Well, Carmilla the First Vampire came out actually this year. My timeline is like very hazy right now.
We're all in that same boat.
Yeah. It came out early this year, and it was sold out, and we're in the second printing now. So I'm very
Awesome.
proud of us for being able to do that. It's a Burger Book imprint by Dark Horse, and we just announced Volume 2, which is coming out next year. I think in the summertime. I have to double check, but I'm very excited. I'm almost finished working on that right now. I think it looks great. And also, again, with, the dog ears thing, like I just finished, the first volume, like late last year, right? And drawing the second volume, like I think I've gotten better. I'm like, oh, I'm starting to get used to these characters. I'm making some choices that I like more than I did before. And so even in just a year, I feel like I'm progressing. So I'm working on that. It's a very exciting book, and I'm very passionate
Can you
about
share a little
it.
bit about it so our listeners can pick up the first volume and then be excited for volume 2?
Yeah, it's first of all, it's like Asian representation, and I love horror and I love vampires.
Mm.
And so I thought it was really cool to have the Asian spin on it. Asian mythology has a lot of, horror characters as well. And we have our own vampires, right? Especially with Chinese mythology.
Okay.
And so we're using that as a spin, and it's, lesbian vampires, very cool, right?
Yes, very cool. I'm already hooked.
Yeah. So it's like, 2 times like representation. And it's something that I think resonates with a lot of people in terms of cultural identity, family, sexuality, also, just finding your place in this world kind of thing. So it's something very close to my heart. Also, because I'm a New Yorker, it's like set in New York. I, grew up in New York in the 90s as well. So, I'm using my memory as reference as well as, like pictures from like archives and stuff. So I think it's really cool. And it has like a really like vintage vibe, I think, especially in terms of like the way I like colored things and like the setting the mood for the genre. So it's something that I hope everyone really enjoys and picks up at some point. And, would love any kind of feedback, of course.
Yeah, well, it looks gorgeous. And I am books and books behind on my reading, but I am definitely to pick up that first volume, and I am so excited for it. And I think that you're really hard on yourself in terms of looking back on your art, but that's how we grow, right? And yeah. I directed and edited a documentary many years ago now, over 10 years ago, and I always tell people from that experience, like every time I look at it, I go, I would have done this, but it's kind of like, and I'm imagining it's the same for an artist. I'm not an artist. My stick figures are left to be wanting as well. Like I can't even that is not where my gift lies. But I imagine it's kind of like you just have to say, okay, this is where I'm at with it. And then this is where I'm at with that in that point in time. And that has to be like, you have to kind of be okay. Otherwise you'll be on. My documentary would never have been done, right? If I had waited for it to be what I wanted it to be, right? And so I feel like, is that the same for you where you have to, at the end of the day, well, it helps, I guess, to have deadlines. If you're working on a comic book, they're like, well, you have till December 1, so get your piece in. But if it's like your own creation and it's kind of like your baby passion project, like how hard is it to just say, no, now I need to move on, or do I have to keep perfecting it? Like, is that a struggle that you have as well?
I think it's hard to want to be perfect all the time because, the deadlines aren't easy, right? They make it difficult for you to want to stay on a piece for too long, right? And I think you want to be really precious with it because you think this is the best work you're going to ever do. But in reality, it's not. That's just for everyone. And I think because even if you are the best that you are now, and like other people who are reading it are being like, oh, this is wonderful. But, 10, 20 years down the line, you're going to look at it and be like, oh, God, that was not my best, So I think no matter what, you have to just appreciate what you're doing. And also like, you can't like sit on it for too long. Like I think if you think that it's going to be perfect or what you're doing now is perfect, I think, it's easy to stagnate if you think that you're the best, right? So if you just moved on from what you're doing, you can always do better, and I think it's a very self-serving thing, right? I mean, as an artist, you're gonna just want to keep working on one thing over and over again. You're like, oh, this face doesn't look right. This panel isn't like coming out the way I want it, and you redraw it over and over, and you can drive yourself crazy. And all your friends are like, it looks fine, it looks good, and you're in your mind, right? Because as an artist, there's a level of perfection you need, which doesn't really exist, right? So then you just have to think, which all our friends actually talk about this a lot, is we pour and stress over it. People are going to read the book in like 5-10 minutes and it's going to be over with, right? All that work and stress, it's just like, pass through in 5 minutes. Are they even going to notice that thing that you've been stressing over? Probably not. So so that's a nice, humbling thing to think about, I think, because like truly, it really probably won't matter. If it's not the most perfect thing in the world, honestly. The only other people who care are like other artists, right? Which is like the most mortifying part of that, I guess.
It's a double-edged sword, really, because it's like you want it to be your best at the moment and give it your all, but at the same time, you have to be realistic. Just because I like the balance in life type of thing. So I feel that as a martial artist, that's something that we're constantly struggling with, right? Like, are we just going to keep working this one technique, or because it can always be better? And then for us, I think it might be a lot different for artists because I feel like you all are more like fine wine. You're just going to keep getting better. But as martial artists, we're like, oh, our time's running out because, I'm not going to be able to jump in another 2 years, or physically, like you feel like you're racing against time a bit, and hopefully that's not the case for you. I know that
you'll be surprised.
Well,
I mean, like I have carpal tunnel. That's really bad,
Right,
like
right. You do your
if
exercises.
I don't work. Yeah, but it's like I work so much, which is my fault, but I work so much that, I work for myself, right? I'm not going to get paid time off. It's like if I don't draw, I just don't get paid for that. So it's like, a lot of our friends have like aches and pains and like, my joints get swollen. I feel old, like my joints get swollen, my back hurts. I have sciatica. My eyesight sometimes it's just like getting worse. And there is definitely a limit to what you do, especially if you're not taking care of your body, right?
This is true.
All things.
Yeah. Well, it's just
there is a time limit.
There is, but then a friend of mine, Stan Sakai, who I look at it, I'm like, he just keeps getting better.
That's true.
So that's what we look towards, right? And a lot of people, like my father is our grandmaster, and he's just like physically not superhuman. Like he's still very physically capable. And we're like, all right, we're just going to keep looking to them as our goal, but we're like, they're kind of the exception, not the rule, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, there's a lot of things, right? Like Stan seems very happy in what you do, right? Or I don't know, right?
Oh, he's super happy. And he is just like, he only wants to draw Usagi, and he has so many more Usagi stories in his head. Every time I talk to him, he's like, oh, I have at least 10 more years of Usagi stories to tell. And I'm going, what? Because they're so rich and they're all so different. And yet he keeps just he's like a machine. He's a Usagi Yojimbo machine. I just don't even know how he does it, but it's so ingrained in him. But yeah, he's super happy doing it. Like I'm sure people have asked him to draw other things. And he's like, no, I just want to do like he'll do the little Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, sometimes, but generally he's I mean, and we're grateful, Usagi's in our book.
Yes.
Yes.
I think there's something very liberating about working on your own thing, right?
Yes.
I mean, I feel like every time I'm working on a new property, like 3 years of my life has been shaved because I've just been like stressing over how to draw this thing perfectly, or else like the fans are going to hate me. I'm never going to be able to work again, right? There's like a level of stress, right? But because he's working on his own universe, he can like literally do whatever he wants.
Yes.
So there must be something very liberating and freeing about that I'm not afforded yet, you know?
Well, I was going to ask, Carmilla, I mean, it's a co-creation, right? And so, I mean, but that's your own.
So there's a limit, but there's a limit to,
that's true. He writes, he draws, he edits. I mean, he finally has allowed someone to color it, but ultimately you're right. It's complete autonomy, like completely autonomous. But
yes, exactly.
So there is that pressure though, because some people have told me like, oh, sometimes it's a little easier. You just do the Batman or the Spider-Man and you move on. But then most people share, oh gosh, it's so much pressure taking on like someone else's arc, being after them. Yes. And then you've got, talk to me a little bit about the Maleficent. Like you said, there's a pressure because there's a preconceived notion of what these characters should look like. So that makes clearly you said that's much harder for you. Like it's much more challenging.
So Maleficent was a very difficult project because, it's a Disney license. They are very strict on what you can do, right? But once you get past that, and Maleficent is kind of this like untold story, except for the movies, right? Which had nothing to do with the comics. They wanted to like separate that. So, okay, no problem. I had to make anything up. So that's like cool and also really difficult because I like it a certain way, right? And so it was like, I'm going to do a story that I want to read. And so I did it. And as it came out, the internet is very vocal sometimes, right? A lot of people are like, why couldn't you do this? Or why didn't you do that? Well, I'm like, I've had multiple interviews where I said I couldn't. That's like the only answer I have for you is that I just could not do that. Disney said no. But then the other things were like, I'm butchering it, but there's a saying that like, if you make it, they will come, right? Like someone will want what you're doing, right? Even if it's like whatever idea you have and you think it's bad, someone will read it. So thinking that I did what I did, and there's like an issue, but by the way, I love drawing Maleficent. I think she's like one of the most fun things to draw. And I'm so privileged and like lucky I got to create this universe, like in 5 issues. And I think I did a decent job. So on the internet, people were like, this is the worst issue ever, because I think like issue 3 was a silent thing. But I liked it because I figured if you get it, you'll get it. And if you don't, I understand. But it tells a tale of like Diablo, her crow, and, also like a very untold character. And I wanted to I wanted to dig a little deep into, what her universe is like without establishing much because it's such a vague thing. And, like the internet hated it. And a lot of people were vocal, but like a lot of reviews were great too. And like ultimately, again, about like people just reading something in 5 minutes, like a lot of people just didn't care about the book anyways, But I went to Comic-Con, New York Comic-Con, and the vocal support from the people who are not online, just like real people who like came up to my table, said the nicest things I've ever heard about any project ever. They were like, it is perfect. It's exactly how I imagined it. I think this is wonderful. I hope you do more. And it was just like so incredibly moving. And the fact that like my vision was understood by these people just like made me like, of course, really happy, but also, you know what, I'm doing okay, I think. Like I may not be as bad as I think I am. And also maybe I'm like headed in the right direction for what I am doing in life and in my career, right? And so I thought that was like very like a really cool like, oh, nice, that kind of moment.
Well, I think that's why conventions are so great, because you have the true fans that come out, and I think 9.9 times out of 10 people are there to be kind, right? And they're there because they want to meet the artists, they want to meet the creators, they want to meet the writers, and they want to get their, book signed. And it's such a interesting fandom, and part of what I really love about comics is just that relationship where everybody is vibing the same way. Like we're all like just loving the art, enjoying the stories. It's supposed to be a happy place. It gets a little crowded for me. I get a little
Sure.
agoraphobic, but like, I think that this is the part where, and I podcasted, I think, through the entire pandemic with Greg Rucka. He's a really, really good friend of mine. And, we just kind of talk about like, when do we just cut out all the noise, like this online quote unquote presence and our mental health and social media. And do we need it? Yes, we need it, I guess, to promote our work, right? Like, how do we then get that out there? But so many artists have chosen to just say, or creators rather, not just artists, creators have said like, I'm just going to disengage from that because it's just not healthy. And so I would say, of course, you have to kind of get some feedback in the reviews, but I would probably lean to kind of ignore those people online. Half of them are trolls, or and they're just so bold in their opinions behind their computer screen. And it has frustrated me in not just this industry, so many, right? In so many things, and how people can be critical and just really mean. But I feel like, yeah, you're right. It may not be someone's cup of tea, and it is their right to share opinions. But I feel like, I think maybe cutting out all the noise and like kind of ignoring the online people. I'm so glad that you were able to be at a convention and get some real feedback from real humans, like you said, because I feel like that's probably more often what people are really feeling. I think it's a little more accurate temperature check.
Yeah, I mean, I love meeting fans. I genuinely do. Like, I love meeting people. I love talking to them. I love, I mean, the compliments are great, right? But at the same time, I want to have like I appreciate you. I want to be able to tell them that, and I genuinely do. But I'm also a freak. Like, I love reading bad comments or like bad reviews or, critiques. No, but so my thing is that like, no one will ever hurt my feelings more than I can hurt my own feelings, right? Like, so you can say whatever you want about me. I've said the worst about myself in my own head. Like, it doesn't even come close, So like, I genuinely don't get bothered by bad comments. And I actually look for reviews and comments online because like, I know what to parse through and like what the real like criticisms are. And
right. And if there are some that are legitimate, right? That you're like, oh, so I can see that. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I want to know what people are thinking, because it's like, okay, well, if this is a problem, then maybe I can like address it in like my work in the future, right? And those are real things. I want to get better, and I want to know what people who are paying me, my readers, to do, right? So like, I want to make sure people are happy, but at the same time, like it's within reasonable, grounds. But so like, I'm actually not bothered by it at all. It's fine if people have their opinions.
You have very thick skins, and that's a really great trait. That's a really great trait. But I don't know so much that I feel hurt by comments that are made by me.
I mean, it's valid to be hurt by it. Absolutely.
Right.
A lot of it is like, we're like a lot of like just drawing monkeys, right? They just see like the product, and then because there's like a level of like, for influencers and like, we're not like, as an artist, are not really influencers unless you are, right? Like, my social media visibility is abysmal. So I'm like the worst person to like even talk about that. But influencers, in the sense that they can get very up and close to you, right? Like, a lot of times celebrities are like, it's literally through a mirror or like a screen, right? And so there's no closeness, right? And the fans can get very close to writers and artists directly because they can meet us, they can directly tweet at us, and we can probably see it. Like a celebrity with like 600 million like followers, they probably don't even care, but we can probably read every comment, and we're very like available, I think, to fans. So I think it's easier for people to feel like they must say something to us, and they forget that like we're like not just people, that we are people,
Right,
you know. And I think people
exactly.
forget that because it's so close, and they're like, well, my opinion matters, and you know, here's what I'm going to have to
I think
say.
that's where it is for me, right? It's not that I'm like crying at night because I see all these things that people say about
Yeah.
me. I mean, I have had to deal with this my whole life. And so, but it's not that it can't be hurtful, because certainly
Sure.
it can be. And like you said, it is valid if that is the reaction. It's just more of, I guess, from the standpoint of, I just feel like to go on and be kind of not critical, but like cruel, right? There's an intent there. And I feel like that's just frustrating for me, because I know that not everyone has the thick skin like we do, and that it can do some serious damage, right? And like, I guess this goes into like cyberbullying and things like that. But I'm also like, I don't even have the time to read this and go through this. Exactly. It's just so frustrating. It's like, I'm like, do the work, everyone, just do the work. But, kind of a seg into talking about mental health. I looked into your podcast, that Spill Your Guts. And it seems like it's kind of a crossover between, comic creation and kind of that experience. If you want to share a little bit about that. Always excited to have another podcaster on the show.
Well, it started off as like just Sweeney Boo and I are like, she's one of my best friends. And so we're like very comfortable in speaking about our feelings. And, it's a very small community. And we figured like, we share our feelings privately. Maybe we should do this out loud just in case people, are not comfortable doing it. And so maybe if you hear us or other people talking about it, it'll like, maybe it'll resonate with you, or think, oh, okay, I'm feeling the same way. I didn't hear it before, didn't have anyone to talk about. And also like a lot of the male, it's a heavy male industry, but so there's a little bit of that, like, closing off. Although artists are much different than like normal society men, right? It's a little bit more like open with feelings and stuff like that. But in the industry, it's very isolated. And it's not just comic artists too. We have like other people, like other freelancers. So it's like a behind the scenes of what it feels like dealing with being isolated, doing your freelance, and also, the fan interaction, which could be very abusive. And like, maybe this will humanize us a little bit more, right? Like, you hate the comics that we put out because it's not the story you wanted, and you like, get angry at it, but it's like so much work and time and stress that goes into it. And like, we want to share that behind the scenes, right? But it's not just about comics. It's also about, like, I lost my dad 2 years ago. So I talk about grief, and I feel like it's a big thing that people don't talk about. And like also, depression. I'm also very depressed. I'm very open about it too.
Yeah.
So it goes into like what kind of career like that isolates me from a lot of people. I am my worst critic. I am very depressed all the time, but also having to be very social and like, so there's like a big umbrella of, mental health things that people don't talk about out loud that I think should be normalized. And, because it's a very isolating job, you don't really get to talk to people about it. So I feel we thought that like this could maybe, even if it's not just entertaining and silly to listen to, maybe it'll be helpful in, knowing that you're heard, or that you're seen, or you're not alone in a lot of things. And, also just like getting into the nitty gritty of like, what, like maybe what you might be doing, as your routine or your life, or the behind the scenes of everything that you do. So I think, and it's a very like small podcast, and it has like a very small following, but the people who do listen are very kind, and the feedback's been wonderful.
Yeah, to me it's funny because I started this podcast like in 2016, um not by accident, post election. But I used to be very much like, oh, I don't have anyone listening. Da, 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 da. I don't have enough people listening. It's like just my husband's listening, right? And you start off these things, and then you start to realize, like, if you are impacting one person,
Right.
but also
Exactly.
you have a really amazing like co-host dynamic, and so you're just enjoying the conversations you're having together anyway. Then it's definitely worthwhile, right? Especially the subject matter I think that you're tackling. It's not about like the number of people that you reach, but if it's like you really resonate with an audience, it doesn't matter how large it is, and I think it can be really important work, right? Especially as a um, Asian American woman. I think what you're doing is great because in our culture, mental health, it's finally kind of making some appearance of strides of being talked about, being normalized, not being such a stigma. But as a teacher, I've got teenagers and I've got 12, 10-year-olds, and I can tell that they're not comfortable talking about it yet. So it's not there. We're not completely there yet where the generations have completely changed. I mean, for sure, it's something that I've been also very open about in terms of therapy and how helpful that has been for me. And so I think what you're doing is fantastic. And I think just being so niche with, yes, I've talked to so many creators that share that same thing. Like you're literally alone in your tower drawing and you're speaking with nobody else. And so you just can feel very isolated. And I think the great thing about comics is that you usually have a collaborator. So that's nice, right? Because at least you'll have a touch base with your writer on occasion. At least you have some window to the outside world, but it can be very isolating. So I think it's fantastic that you are kind of sharing and bringing attention to that and just having those conversations. And they're not always easy. But one of the things that I talk about a lot on this podcast, because I don't just talk to comic creators, I talk to so many different people from different walks of life, is that, we talk about things. And if they're difficult to talk about, then we should be talking about it, right? Then that's definitely more of a reason. Like we realize, I know this is something that needs to be out there. So thank you for that. That's fantastic. I did not know about it, I'll be honest, till you brought it up. And so it's just kind of amazing how the world of comics and art and all those things can bring different people together. And then, hopefully some of my listeners who often listen to comic creators that are on this show that have a love, and some of them are artists themselves, will find their way to your podcast and find value in the conversations you're having. So yeah, thank you for putting that out there. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you. I mean, like it's, I've also always been like a very emotionally open person. Like my mom raised me. So, we're very emotional people. So she was very like, talk about your feelings and all that stuff. I mean, I do multiple therapies, so I think it should be normalized.
Yeah, agree. And the more conversations we have, then hopefully that will happen. Especially, like I said, a lot of the things I do as a teacher, it's for this next generation. We're done for. No, I'm just kidding.
Exactly. No, it's true. It's true. It's over. No, I have like how many 50 years left, and I'll just be old and senile. Yeah, the next generation. We need to take care of the world for the next generation.
So this is the coloring book. This is why like education for them is important. Like do better than we did. Do better than the other generation. Talk more. Learn from our mistakes, kind of thing. That's right. I think it's fantastic. But is there any other projects that we didn't really get to talk about that you want our listeners to know, to look for? This probably will be airing in January-ish, but it doesn't matter. Just kind of, if there's anything else, I'll drop all your social media for people to follow you, of course, and look at all the amazing things you're doing, and the podcast if people are interested, Spill Your Guts. But if there's other projects, please feel free to share.
Thank you. So Carmilla the First Vampire already came out. Carmilla the Last Vampire Hunter will be out next year, or I guess this year once this podcast is out. DC's 'Twas the Might Before Christmas also will be out in December as well. It's a holiday special that I worked on. It's an anthology with a bunch of other wonderful creators. And Star Wars Tales of the Death Star had already come out now. So that's a really fun horror Star Wars anthology that's also with a bunch of creators. So go support. I have other projects coming out for 2024. So, keep your eyes peeled for that. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, I'm hoping we'll get a chance to talk again. And
I would love that.
Thank you again so much for your participation in the Make Us Visible Florida coloring book. It is super meaningful. We need all the help we can get here in Florida, especially. So I am very excited about this. And I know our listeners are going to be excited to meet you and to look at all of the work that you're doing. So thanks so much for being on the show, and hopefully we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.